that caught my attention, and maybe all of you, or at least some of you, heard about it. There was a florist in Yakima who refused to do the wedding of a gay couple, and so the owner's being prosecuted by the Attorney General. I think that's who it is, someone anyway. So she's in legal trouble. And I'm pretty sure that there's some differences of opinion in this room as to whether what she did was the correct thing or not. She believes that she was acting on her convictions and that she doesn't support gay marriages, and so she didn't feel like she should participate in them by providing flowers. And but the law says that you can't discriminate. So anyway, I'm not going to go into all the issues there. But as I was thinking about it, I realized the difficulty of living in a world which is a fallen world as followers of Jesus Christ. And I know that we say that this is a Christian country, that America is a Christian country, but the reality is that it's not a Christian country. It was founded on some Christian principles. There were some people that were involved in the forming of our country who were Christians, and thankfully many of the precepts that we have embedded in our Constitution are indeed Christian. But the reality is that there's no such thing as a Christian country in this planet, that we are fallen people, and the only time we will ever live under a Christian kingdom is when Christ comes and rescues this planet, and then we'll know what that's like. And so, in a sense, it's almost a disadvantage to say we live in a Christian country because of the tension of it all. And I want to address that this morning, and I want to do it in sort of a, perhaps ungainly way, awkward, probably not the very best way, but this is the way I came up with. And first of all, before I tell you this, I'm going to tell you sort of an illustration of what I think it's like. Let me first of all say that I don't have anything against tigers, or taggers as some of my family call them. Tigers. I actually like tigers. They're one of my favorite creatures, but they kind of have a negative sense in my little story. And on the other hand, I'm not overly crazy about horses. I know some of you love and would like to marry horses, but I can live with or without horses. They're okay to ride, and I've been around them all my life, but they're not my great. Okay, so anyway, but imagine that there's this zoo, and this is a huge zoo, but they have to cut back because of financial reasons, and so they've decided the tigers have this huge, nice open area, and they decide to move the horses in with the tigers. Now, they first of all lay some ground rules for the tigers. You can't eat the horses, and the tigers aren't supposed to kick, or the horses aren't supposed to kick the tigers. But nevertheless, there are these two species that are living together in this enclosure, and they have to learn to get along. Curiously, the tigers are very independent animals. They live by themselves. They don't live in packs. They are solitary animals, and they like their life that way. The horses, on the other hand, live in a herd, and everything they do relates to being herd animals. They live for one another, and when they move around, they think about each other, they care for each other, they care for their offspring of each other, and they nurture the herd. That's the way horses live. They live for the herd. The tigers, on the other hand, they live for themselves. Once in a while they get together and maybe have some offspring, but right after that they're back apart again on their own. That's the way they live their life. Now they are forced together in this enclosure, and they have to live together. The tigers see some of the advantages of the way the horses live, and there's a part of them that kind of wish they were horses. And so they sort of adopt some of the rules and principles that the horses have, and the horses look at the tigers and they realize that the tigers would be better off if in fact they were horses. But the reality is that the horses themselves can't convince the tigers to become horses. They can't change their stripes. The other thing that the horses actually come to realize is that they actually all once were tigers. They didn't know this at first, but they discovered that in fact they were all tigers at one point. But something happened to them. The magical zookeeper somehow sprinkled them with magic horse powder and transformed them from tigers into horses. But there's still some lingering aspects of tigerness about them, which make it very difficult to be completely a horse. Sometimes they'll look and there's a few stripes showing here and there. Sometimes they open their mouth and rather than having horse teeth, they have tiger teeth. Some of the tigers like to pretend to be horses, and so they'll show up into the horse herd and they'll tie extra straw on their tails so they look like a horse, and they'll try and whinny like a horse, and they'll pretend to be a horse. But the reality is that they're not a horse. And as soon as the little horse meeting is over once a week, they go back out into the world and be a tiger. And the other frustrating thing for the horses is that oftentimes they have to leave the herd and go out and mingle with the tigers, and they have to get along with the tiger. And so they're frustrated because they don't know how to apply horse language in the tiger community. So that crudely is sort of my assessment of what it's like to be a Christian in a fallen planet. To try and be Christ to the world, to try to represent what my true humanity is all about, at the same time realizing that I'm as fallen as they are, that I'm as messed up as the rest of them, that I can see that they would be better off, and that we'd all be better off if we could be somehow transformed into the person of Jesus Christ and be like Him. But there's a huge part of my nature that just wants to go back to being a tiger. Fortunately, the Bible has some help for us, I believe. So if you take your Bible and turn to the book of Isaiah, chapter 44, there are some important principles that God lays out for us about being a follower of God in the midst of a world which sometimes sees the advantages of God, sometimes sees the advantages of even following Him, but basically deep down in their heart have absolutely no interest in doing that. 44th chapter of Isaiah. And I'm not going to go through the whole chapter, but the first part of it. I just want to read parts of it and make some observations about our perspective as the children of God, as God's followers. But now listen, O Jacob, my servant, Israel, whom I have chosen. And the first thing that stands out, and I think that we need to recognize and remind ourselves of, is that in fact we are the children of Abraham. That we are the ones that God talked about when He talked about Abraham, and He said, I am going to have a flock of children, a herd of horses, if you will. I'm going to have people that pass on from generation to generation who will be my people. So you didn't come here because of some choice that you made. Now I know in your heart you came to a place and you said, I want to choose God. But you need to understand and recognize that God foresaw that back in the point of your conception. You were chosen by Him. You are special. You're unique. This is what the Lord says, continuing on. He who made you, who formed you in the womb, and who will help you. You know, I think one of the most important things that Jesus said at one time in His life, at least it was very important to me to realize, he was in the midst of a meeting, and He was doing some pretty radical things. He was saying some pretty radical stuff. And so His family came to get Him. They wanted to take Him away, take Him back home, sit Him down, explain to Him how life worked. It's just comical as you think about it. Here are these humans trying to explain to God how life works. They wanted to straighten God out. They didn't see Him as God. They just thought He was their confused brother or son. And someone said, hey, your family's here. They're getting ready to cart you off. And He said, let me tell you who my family are. This is my family right here, these people. There is no doubt that every one of us has a bond to those people that we are that we share genetic material with. But God wants to make it abundantly clear that there is a higher principle than that genetic bonding, and that is a spiritual bonding between you and the Creator. Your parents supplied the ingredients to form you, but it was God that put the spirit of life into those cells. It didn't just happen as a result of science. I don't care what scientists say. It didn't just happen as a result of biology. That God is the author of life. And He's the one that took those inert cells and He put life into them. And He chose specifically you. Not just some random human, but you to be alive, because He wanted you in your uniqueness and exactly who you are to be part of His creation. It was as significant as if you chose a seed out of millions of seeds and said, I'm going to pick this seed and plant it. He picked you. And there were millions, literally millions of options for Him when you were conceived, but He picked you. You were chosen. You're unique. You're special. And as a result of that, He says, you do not need to be afraid, O Jacob, my servant. And the word there actually is Israel, Jacob, Israel, referring to this amazing clan of people that spreads throughout all generations. Jeshurun, whom I have chosen. And Jeshurun means the upright one. It means the one who stands and represents God. So God is representing you to the rest of the world. He is using you as a representative of Himself. And this is what He goes on. For I will pour water on the thirsty ground, and streams on the thirsty land, and streams on the dry ground. You know, you can take the best composted dirt that you could ever create. You can have all of the elements of growth in that dirt. You can have the best, most fertile, and the best variety of seed, and you can put it in that dirt, but it will never, never, never grow unless it has one other ingredient: water. It has to have water. And the point, I think, that God is trying to make to us is that it is not our responsibility to change the planet. It is not our responsibility to change the world. It is God's responsibility, that God will provide the water. That is so, so relieving as we think of the turmoil of our lives even, to recognize it's not something that I have to straighten out. That God will provide the water to turn this desert that I'm living in, to turn this mess that I'm stepping out of in my life, and to turn it into something which is fertile and wonderful, which will turn into a garden. I will provide the water. I will provide the streams. And then He goes on, He says, I will pour out my Spirit on your offspring and my blessing on your descendants. And I believe that we need to follow the same line here and recognize that when God is talking about descendants and when God is talking about offspring, He's using the higher term of spiritual. Sometimes those offspring may be your biological children. Sometimes they might be children that you poured your life into, the way that Karen's been pouring her life into those young ladies. Those are the offspring that are the blessing to God. And I know many parents whose children, in fact, there's a lot of parents in this room whose children are struggling right now. And you perhaps are feeling like you're a failure. Like, it took my child to Sunday school their whole life. And they're not following God anymore. And I think that the message here is that God will pour water on the ground and that He will spawn your descendants from that dry earth, whether it be your children, someone else's children, that God promises that His kingdom will not stop. It will continue to flourish. It will continue to grow. It will continue to thrive. They will spring up like grass in a meadow, like poplar trees by a flowing stream. One will say, I belong to the Lord. Another will call himself by the name of Jacob. Another will write on his hand the Lord's and will take the name Israel. Read a really interesting book, sort of read it this week, written by a professor from Yale about on the God of the Muslim world. Is it the same God that we worship? And his contention was, if you examine carefully what they're saying about who God is and his character, and if you study the writings, not what they say, but if you study the writings, his conclusion is, yes, it's the same God. And I don't know whether I agree with that or not, but I think that the point is, and the point that he's making in this passage is that God can express himself to people in any which way he wants. And I'm reminded of something which happens in C.S. Lewis's book, the very last book, in The Last Battle. And there's one of the soldiers there from the other side who's with Aslan. And they're all saying, what's he doing here? He says, well, he thought he was fighting for me, even though he thought he was fighting against me. Or something like that. I forget how that works. But I think the reality is that God will bring who he wants into his kingdom, and it's not our responsibility to walk around with litmus paper and try and figure everyone out. That it's our responsibility to trust God to do the sorting. In fact, it never says that the church is supposed to do the sorting. In all of Jesus' parable, it's God that does the sorting. It's never his followers that does the sorting. It's God. It's our responsibility to love the world, not to sort them. And God will bring to himself whoever he chooses to bring to himself. The last thing that he talks about, I'm not going to read this, but he's talking about idols. And idols are something which is part of so many cultures in our world today. You travel just about any other country and you can see idols. But you can also see a lot of idols in America. We just don't call them idols. And in reality, an idol is something that somebody creates to give them the confidence and the comfort from God without having the responsibility to God. It's what a person uses to remain a tiger when they want to be a horse. They want the benefits of being a horse, so they create something in their life, anything, which allows them to have some of the feeling of hoarseness, if you will, without having to give up the life of a tiger. And so they, in a sense, pay homage to it, whether it's some activity, it could be some belief system, it could be a political view, it could be the way that you treat people. There are so many different things that can become an idol for us. And in reality, there's probably an idol in every single person's life, and maybe many, many of them. And the process of growing toward God is the process of recognizing what stands between me and that more intimate, personal relationship to him. So this morning, I don't have an answer for the lady in Yakima. I don't have an answer specifically for you, except to say to you that it's not simple. It will never be easy. There will never be the place on the planet in which it is easy, because we are on a fallen planet, because we are fallen people. Even followers of Christ, we are fallen. God's exhortation to us is that in the end, he will win. In the end, he says, love one another and love humanity. And that's the best way you can love me. Let's just stand together. Let me conclude with a benediction.